The steady churn of political issues has put the national government under pressure in the last few months. We're joined by University of Otago political scientist Dr Bryce Edwards, who's returning to 9 Local News after a year to run his eye over those issues. Good evening, Bryce.
Hi, Rebecca.
Now, we haven't seen you for quite some time. What have you been up to?
I've been on sabbatical, which means academics get to go away for a few months, well, about 8 months, and do some research on certain things. So I've been off doing some work in Germany, of all places, in Berlin. Political finance and political corruption has been my research area.
And you found that beneficial in Berlin?
Yes, it's a wonderful city, and there's some very good researchers over there that I've worked with.
Now, back home, Nova Pay has hit the government pretty hard. How do you think National's handling that issue?
It's been a disaster, and they've handled it incredibly badly. The blame has to be spread around a few different places, but primarily it's the government that's made a bad decision in going ahead with this when officials told them that there were problems with the scheme. But in the last, month or two, they have taken it seriously and they're dealing with it a lot better than they were. They've given Stephen Joyce the role of fixing it, and he is someone with a lot of competence, and he seems to be knocking some heads together, and in the next week or so I think we'll hear about whether he's going to totally axe the scheme or be able to fix it.
Are we seeing some cracks in National's facade, or do you think this could just be mid-term wobbles?
That's a really good way to put it, actually, cracks in the facade, because when you see cracks in walls, depending on how you look at it, the wall's going to fall over, or else it's just cracks that can be painted over and plastered up, and that's really what we've been talking about for the last year or so, all these cracks. The opponents of the government, commentators like me, have been talking about those cracks, but it hasn't led to any disasters. So the government seems pretty safe at the moment, I think. So those cracks just do not open up into, gaping holes.
How are our local opposition MPs performing?
Pretty well at the moment, I think, actually. Yes, I have been critical in the past, but no, I think they're doing very well. But who you have to look at, of course, is David Clark and Michael Woodhouse, and they're doing extremely well. They're making waves. Michael Woodhouse is now a minister in this government, which is a pretty impressive achievement. And David Clark, of course, in the reshuffle last week in Labour, was bolted up to number 12. So that's a really impressive climb for him. So, watch out for those two politicians on the national stage.
And Claire Curran, how's she going?
Very well. She's focusing on some of the big issues in South Dunedin. She's a solid performer. And of course Mataura Ture as well, always solid.
Now, there was a protest in town today about the Social Security Amendment Bill. What are the issues with that one?
Well, it's been pretty quiet over the last year. The government announced last year that they are going to toughen up work testing, drug testing for beneficiaries, particularly looking at parents on the DPB. And the problems are, I guess, that for its opponents, this is sort of, beneficiary bashing. It's a very complex bit of legislation with some quite harsh penalties for parents. And its critics would say that it's not really going to achieve anything because we're in a time of high unemployment, there are no jobs, and that's what this supposedly is supposed to achieve, getting beneficiaries into work. I don't really think it's anything really more than sort of a populist attempt to show that the government's doing something.
And we also saw the formal launch of an appeal to Parliament that took place in the Museum Reserve today. Do you think there's a serious groundswell against the direction of this country's politics?
I don't actually. I'm not saying whether there should or shouldn't be, but I don't think there are people on the streets marching at the moment. People, I think, have had their expectations lowered. We're in a financial, not depression, but lull, and people are saying, well, this is just how things have to be. So we've had some surveys out in the last couple of weeks that show people are actually quite contented and aren't particularly worried with the financial situation of this country, maybe on some of the more environmental questions, and that's where this group today have been particularly focused. There's a bit more disgruntlement, but so far, we're not really a kind of a passionate people out there walking the streets at the moment.
Now, there's an election coming up next year. Is it too early to put your prediction in?
Well, it's a bit of a boring prediction, but at the moment, I actually think things are going to stay pretty much the same as they are at the moment. We've got opinion polls where National are in the high 40s, Labour in the low 30s, and you've got the Greens in there about 12%. I actually think people aren't going to change their minds much over the next year and a half. We're going to have an election with those sort of figures. But that is interesting because that puts those left and right blocs on a knife edge, with neither side completely able to govern, which brings attention to New Zealand First, which is going to be the party that is going to be very significant at the next election.
Political scientist Dr Bryce Edwards, thanks for your time. Nice to have you back.
Thanks, Rebecca.